Welcome to another episode of It's a Lawyer's Life. My guest today is Rachel Spearing from Pump Court Chambers. Rachel is a criminal specialist, but very heavy duty at crime. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi.
And when I say heavy duty, you have dealt historically with organised crime, with big drug cases. And I just wanted to ask you how long you've been doing that and whether that's changed over the years.
Well, I've been in practice now for about 18 years. I was called in 1999, and I have I've developed what was a really pretty hardcore criminal practice, rapes, murders, torture, some work overseas for foreign organisations, and yeah, it's a difficult and had been a heavy diet. Now I've developed over the last 2 or 3 years into more criminal and regulatory work, which involves criminal responsibility towards business rather than humans. So there has been a change. Obviously, the quality and the length of time that takes you away from home is less.
When you were doing the really heavy duty stuff, how long would a case last? Or
well, you have more than one case on the go. I think that's the something that perhaps the public don't realise, that as a barrister, you don't work on one case at a time. You have many cases ongoing, and there is often a real juggle to keep them all, the plates spinning, as well as managing your home life. And so a typical case can really start at a very early stage, perhaps after the magistrate's court, transferring up to the Crown Court, but it might take perhaps 6 months or even a year before that trial is concluded. So you're developing a relationship with your client, or working with prosecutors, teams of investigators to get the evidence together, to put that trial together, to present it to the court ultimately. And then obviously some trials, as you may know, can take many weeks to conclude, going to court every day from 10 till 4, but obviously lots going on in between in the preparation before and after court, so it can take some time.
And one of the questions that non-lawyers always want to ask is, how can you act for someone if you're defending them when you think that they've done something really reprehensible?
Well, I think an easy analogy to see is it's a bit like being a doctor. The Hippocratic Oath applies in a slightly different way to lawyers as it does for doctors. If somebody comes to you, we have something called the cab rank principle, where if you stop a taxi and you get in, you tell it where you want to go, it has to take you. And often we have some control over the types of cases that we do, but if you're instructed and you're competent and capable of doing that brief, you have to take it. And sometimes they are difficult cases, the content is very difficult, or the individual or the circumstances of that case may be personally testing, but you have a responsibility to provide a service to the public and to provide a duty to the court to conduct that case to resolution in the interests of justice and in serving the interests of what is expected of you.
And then how do you shake off a case that's particularly difficult?
Well, there have been many cases from time to time that resonate, perhaps because of the content or even the individual that you've developed a relationship in a professional way with supporting, perhaps who's convicted and given a very long sentence. And so I have found over the years developing and understanding a sense of professional identity, that when you put on those robes, and we wear wigs and gowns for a number of reasons, largely historically it was because of the tradition of court dress, but then in more modern times it was a very useful way of anonymising yourself. I have stood next to juries and defendants' families having prosecuted a case and not been recognised on the bus, because when your hair's tied back and your wig's on, you look completely different. But also it helps from a practical way to see yourself stepping into your robes and having that responsibility professionally to do that job, but then very much taking them off and either leaving the case or the content or the issues of that behind and trying to resume your normal life outside with your family or your friends.
And where do you fall on the wig debate? To keep or not to keep?
I am a keeper. I'm a keeper fan for all of the reasons that I've just summarised. That it is useful, but also I think it provides the participants with a formal and a serious forum. When we are doing cases involving children, we take our wigs off and we are not intending to intimidate, and we want to reassure people who find themselves interacting with lawyers that we are normal human beings and people. But in some circumstances, it's important to have that separation and to put on your robes, to behave in that formal way, and it helps.
Some of your cases have been very high profile, and there will be a lot of media interest in them. So how do you, as the barrister trying to get on with the work, deal with that intrusion?
I have had, I had a case where more than one case, and I've had death threats, where people write to you, death threats, where you're defending somebody, or you're making representations for an individual who's charged with very serious offences, and people feel strongly about that and write to you, or stop you in the street and want to speak to you about that. Or also where I've done a murder where it's on the news and people are interested in talking to you about that constantly, whether it's people in your own workplace or even outside. And of course you can't talk too much about that and wouldn't want to. So it does intrude, and it can be difficult. And it's important that you are supported, whether that is sharing quality time with friends outside, to escape what you're doing during the day. That I think is a really important work-life balance. But to remind people that actually it's a service, that in the same way an ambulance is responding to somebody in distress, or a doctor will treat someone who's dropped in front of them with a heart attack, they have that moral obligation to provide. So, far be it from being enemies of individuals for providing that service, that is a responsibility that we have, and we can't always escape.
Apart from being very successful in your legal career, you're very active in a lot of other areas, and we're going to look at wellness in a moment, which is a big topic that you're involved in. But you've also been very, very supportive of women in the legal profession, and particularly women barristers. If you were looking back to your life now when you started, what did you think that you might find as a woman in the profession, and what have you found?
I think I was interviewed in pupillage quite some years ago now, and I think I said in that interview, I think it was for the Daily Post and Echo up in Liverpool, that I had a very clear expectation of having a family, of not believing that there would be any impediment to having a family and having a successful career. I think the reality is that it is terribly difficult to be all things to all people, to manage having children and to manage being there for them, and to build a practice and deal with the 24/7 demands that might come because of emails and the contact that we are now having with the outside world, both in the UK, and if you do overseas work, which I've found, the emails pinging by the bedside, disturbing my sleep when other people are wide awake and want questions answered immediately. So I think it has been challenging.
Challenging, but would you still encourage, if you were speaking to a school full of young girls, would you still encourage them to enter the legal profession?
Absolutely, and it's one of the great privileges. I'm a bencher of Inner Temple. I do a lot of outreach work. One of the privileges of that position is you are invited and encouraged to talk about accessing the legal profession and diversity, and why it's really, really important to encourage people from all different backgrounds that they can have a successful career. There are challenges, but they are, in my opinion, they're not complete barriers. That if someone is determined, I'm from a very non-traditional state school background. I was lucky to have the outreach support of one of the inns. Was mentored and helped by women along the way, and I'm very, very passionate about ensuring that those opportunities are afforded to others, either at student level or a new practitioner.
If we look at media portrayals of lawyers, they're usually criminal lawyers, and they're usually men. I know there was Silk recently, but traditionally they've always been men. Do you think it's still a boys' club, or do you think it's changing or has changed already?
I think we know from the data statistics that at least, in fact, I think slightly greater than 50, it's 50-50. So men and women, 50-50, joining the bar and completing their professional exams. The challenges come to retaining women and progressing women through their career because of the natural career breaks that they wish to take and need to take to have a family, and the difficulty of rejoining the travelator, as it were, to getting back on and practicing at a level where you can manage your family responsibilities and your work responsibilities. And so I think that's why it's certainly not because of a lack of quality. Because there are some fantastic female QCs and some amazing juniors doing very heavy work. It's just the practicality of them being supported in that progression. But also the reality is that women need more sometimes encouragement to apply for that progression, and they wait until they feel fully competent and fully confident in undertaking that role. So that's why perhaps sometimes there are not as many women visible in the criminal senior bar.
I said that you're very much an activist, and there's an area of law and indeed life that you are really active in now, and you're becoming very well known for it, and that's wellness. And a couple of weeks ago I went to the Wellness in the Law conference that you organised, and I have to say it was an amazing effort by you, so thank you for that. What inspired you to organise that?
Well, the wellbeing at the bar work started really in earnest about in 2015, and it started because I co-founded an initiative with the General Counsel of the Bar to really take the temperature of our profession. We were all and are aware of our own journeys and the trials and tribulations of our day-to-day difficulties and jobs that we do, and we knew from the research in other professions that mental health and mental distress is something that was rarely spoken about. And my personal experience was I had a leader who unfortunately took his life, and I became aware of the phenomenology of distress amongst lawyers, having done some research in the UK. So that was really the beginning of the initiative. And the Wellbeing at the Bar portal was created following research which we did, which highlighted that 1 in 3 found it difficult to talk about their work, that there was still a stigma surrounded to mental health.
One of the things that was most striking about the conference was how candid people were about their personal experiences and really talking about personal, private matters that perhaps they wouldn't normally have done. What were you hoping to achieve when you organised the conference, and what do you think that you took away from it?
Well, one of the real initiatives of the Wellbeing at the Bar work was to normalise the aspects of people's difficulties that they experienced in their professional lives, and to explain and make others feel safe and comfortable, and to prepare them for their life in practice. So I take away the fact that the chairman of the bar came and opened the Wellness for Law Forum, that we had the treasurer of the Inn welcoming the initiative, and that leadership, and there were some really eminent leaders amongst the participants and the delegates, just sitting alongside their clerks and their practice managers, because they are alive to the challenges of the landscape that we face in our professional careers, and the fact that in order to practice well and to be high performers, we are under pressure, and we need to develop the skills and the learning and the experiences to be able to cope with those challenges.
And the more you delve into this topic, what are you learning maybe about yourself and then about the colleagues around you?
Well, leading the wellness work has been an incredibly extraordinary experience, both personally but also professionally, that I thought I was the only one who used to worry about the things or the questions I'd forgotten to ask, or feel terribly anxious or hopeless after a judge perhaps had been a little bit sharp-tongued in a submission that had gone on for far too long, and ruminate and feel a sense of perfectionism and concern about my work. But in fact, the work and reading the empirical studies, speaking to these clinicians and the academics who have studied high-functioning professionals, not just lawyers. These are normal aspects in the same way that sportsmen and women are prepared to deal with the challenges that they have, that we are all feeling these sorts of pressures, and that the work that we are undertaking is difficult both in nature, intellectual content, but also in the human content of sometimes what we see and what we deal with. So we are no superhuman race. We're not born into this superhuman role as a barrister. That we gain the resilience as we grow, but we really need to be taught and educated about these issues as risks.
Well, the conference was great, but it's not the end, is it? Because there's more work to be done. And I know that you've started a new initiative as well now. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it follows really the Wellness for Law UK initiative was born out of going to conferences in Australia and looking at how the education and the development and collaboration of sharing knowledge is done there. And so the initiative is to create a network of academics, clinicians, practitioners, practice managers, individuals who are interested in supporting lawyers and supporting those who are wishing to gain and develop skill around mental health and wellbeing.